Hello and welcome, boys, girls, and potential hermaphrodites of the night. I am Jeremiah from United Atheists of America, and welcome to another wonderful edition of The Mind of an Atheist. Joining us tonight, we have a terrific panel. We have Brandon from Life of an Atheist, Dave from Hammer the Gods, and we have special guest author David Fitzgerald, author of Nailed and a couple of other books, which I'm going to give him an opportunity to talk about in just a moment. So let's get started by doing the thing we always do and giving our panel the opportunity to talk about their pages and what they do. So we'll start first, left to right. We'll go with Brandon. Tell us about Life of an Atheist, bud.
Well, simply put, it's my page. I haven't been doing too much with it lately because I'm trying to get my YouTube channel back up and running to start posting videos on it, because I'm going to do video links to my page, doing questions from people who are fans of the page and so on and so forth. I'm still trying to figure out, forgive me for this, been trying for 2 weeks trying to master as much as I can Photoshop and all the other ones that I've been given by people. It takes too much time. That way I can actually make my page look nicer and keep it up in the styles of everybody else. That way it's something nice to look at. I can get more original content out there instead of just random memes that I make off the top of my head.
Right on.
That's about it right now.
All right, let's jump over to Dave at Hammer the Gods. And while Dave tells us about Hammer the Gods, I'm going to turn a light on in here because it's dark.
Okay, well, Hammer the Gods, we try and focus on original content. There's a bunch of atheist pages out there that just share memes between each other. It seems like almost nobody's making them. We try and focus on making them. We also share other groups as well, and we also like reach out to other pages that like yours.
Yes. Right on. And now let's jump over to David Fitzgerald. David, I know you've got a lot of credentials here, so I want to go ahead and give you an opportunity to talk about them. So you are our guest of the evening. We want to thank you, first of all, for joining us here. But you are the guest of the evening, so go ahead and tell us all about yourself.
Great. My name's Dave Fitzgerald. I'm an author, atheist activist in San Francisco. I'm the director of the Atheist Film Festival that's coming up next month in San Francisco. We're excited about that. I'm also the co-founder, along with Greta Christina and Chris Hall, of Godless Pervert Story Hour, which is a new literary thing happening in the Bay Area. And I'm also the California-Nevada regional campus organizer for Secular Student Alliance.
Right on. Tell us, if you don't mind, real quick, before we get going, tell us a little bit about the Atheist Film Festival, because I think that's something that a lot of people would be interested in if they had a little more information.
Yeah, it's a great excuse to get to San Francisco next month if you need one. It's going to be September 14th. We're also having a gala director's party the night before on Friday the 13th. It's in the 5th year of the festival. We've got documentaries, we've got feature films, we've got shorts, we've got comedies, we've got films that'll make you laugh, films that'll make you cry, films that'll piss you off. And films that'll make you feel great about being an atheist.
Awesome.
Right. It sounds like a lot of really good you can tell it's something that a lot of time went into, and that I'm sure a lot of people are going to enjoy it. So one last thing, if you don't mind, since your book Nailed is the big topic of the show tonight, go ahead and tell us a little about what Nailed is.
There it is.
What it contains and other.
Yeah. In a nutshell, it's the top 10 basic ways that the official story of Jesus that we get from Christians just fails. It fails to pass the reality check. I started it.
Fails the sniff test.
It fails the sniff test big time. The ironic thing about it is I never set out to write a book debunking Jesus. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the thought that there was no Jesus never even crossed my mind. I just assumed, like everybody else, oh yeah, well, there had to be a guy named Jesus. You know, he wasn't the Son of God, but there had to be a guy or a couple guys in first century Judea running around. And it wasn't until I got curious about the history of Jesus, about what we could know about what he really said and really did, and how we could tell the difference. That's when I started looking into historical evidence for him. That's when the first thing that hit me is like, wow, that's all the evidence we have, and that's the state of the evidence we have. And about 2 years into this process of looking into what we could know and not know, it just occurred to me that I just don't think this guy existed at all. And that's
Right.
what the book's about.
Right
I
on.
totally get that process, because when I realized how little evidence there actually was, I was like, really? I
Yeah.
was very surprised as well.
Right on.
And it's not even just the lack of evidence, the sparsity of evidence, because, I mean, we do have evidence. We just don't have good evidence.
Yeah.
And the evidence we do have points in a different direction than the way it's always been given to us by Christianity.
Right. And hopefully we'll get an opportunity to look at as much of that evidence as possible tonight. We will be going for the full 2 hours. For those of you who are new to the show. And I guess finally, now that we've introduced David, I'm Jeremiah from United Atheists of America. I also represent No God, No Peace, No God, No Peace. If you haven't checked that out, I really would ask you to if you get the time. Basically, what United Atheists of America is just a collection of thoughts, ideas, processes, arguments, whatever else comes along that we think contributes in some way to the atheist movement. Try to collect them all. We got a lot of admins over there. We try to, like Hammer the Gods, we also try to focus on original content and getting new things out that people might not have seen, considered, or thought about before, with the hopes of provoking discussion, learning potential, whatever might come about. So if you get an opportunity, go check out United Atheists of America. We'd love to have you. And that's about that. No God, No Peace is basically a 4-part section dedicated to humor, comedy, seriousness, whatever else you might find. So if you get a chance, go ahead and check out that. We also would like to make a couple of announcements real quick as we are about to get started. The first one is, as always, to our lovely viewers out there, you can leave comments on the video. We can see them, and we will reply to them if we get the opportunity. We would like to advise you that there is about a 1.5 to 2 minute delay between what we are saying and what you are seeing. So if you leave a comment and we don't get to it right away, don't be discouraged. We might just not get it for a little while. Well, I also want to point out that there might be a tad bit of lag going on here in the feed, so if there's a little bit of technical difficulty, please try to bear with us. It should, phase out over time if there is any. The only other announcement is that we would like to invite you to go to the Mind of an Atheist Facebook page and give it a like. That way you can keep up with extra content. We will be sending a lot of links that we actually use on the show to that Facebook page for you to do further research on your own and get your own conclusions to some of the discussions that we have here tonight. And now that we are here, let's get right into it. Tonight's episode, CruciFICTION, Debunking the Existence of Jesus. This actually has been a long time coming episode. We've wanted to do something like this for quite a while, and I'm actually really disappointed that our friend of the show, Michael Sherlock, couldn't join us tonight. His book, I Am Christ, really goes into some depth on that, and it would have been great to have David and Mike with the amount of firepower that those two possess. So it would have, but nonetheless, we'll give a shout out to Mike anyway. So if you're out there, Mike, hopefully we can get you on soon. But
next time for sure, Mike.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe in 6 months or something.
But the episode here tonight is going to be all about looking into the idea of Jesus, the mythology of Jesus, whether or not he existed, what arguments exist for it, what arguments exist against it. Was he borrowed from other religions and whatnot? We have a couple of really interesting sources here to go along with David Fitzgerald's knowledge and book and whatnot. So we're hoping that we can really get into some good discussion, and we want to encourage, of course, our viewers to get on that discussion as well and contribute as much as they can. So I'll leave it open. If you guys, we could start this any way you want. I'm thinking the best way might be to give a quick summary of the stories of Jesus and the ideas of Jesus that surround what he really is. So if anybody would like to go first, I'll leave it open to you guys.
I have a good starting point.
Absolutely.
I don't know if we have any believers who are watching this at all or who tune in later, but if you are a believer, please listen to the information, because we're not just trying to bash your beliefs. Mm-hmm. We're trying to tell you what is the evidence for the existence of this man. That's it. Right on.
That is a good point. I do want to encourage everyone that's watching to come to, it's what we always say, come to the conclusions yourself. If you come onto the show, and you like what you see, and you do the research and you come to the same conclusion, that's awesome. If you come to a different one, that's okay too. No one's here to tell you how to believe. We want you to come to the answers yourself, however that might be, because the show's purpose has always been and always will be about education. So I guess we can start with looking into who Jesus was, what he was supposed to have done, and what it supposedly meant. We obviously know that Jesus was the Christian Son of God, if you will. He was born to be the sacrifice to relieve sin from mankind. He supposedly was able to commit all sorts of miracles, magical things, if you will, like walking on water, turning water into wine, healing the sick and the blind, and of course, the big story is that he was crucified, died, and came back several days later, and ascended into heaven. Now, this is, to be blunt, this is a little far-fetched to begin with. Depending on who you ask, Jesus is supposedly the same being as God. He is his own son and his own father, so you've got a whole mess of family tree problems there. But even to get away from some of that, the ideas of mystical prowess, the ability to defy physics and walk on water, the ability to change water into wine and go around healing people without any sort of medicine or whatnot. It's really difficult to believe that these ideas happen. So I guess where I would like to start with this is, why do you think that this idea of Jesus, this character, this whole sacrifice, this whole thing has assimilated itself into society? How has this particular myth survived as well as it has?
Fear.
It's had a 2,000-year free ride, basically.
That too.
Okay.
It was also chosen as to be the national religion of a very big ruler chose it. So
right, of course. So there is that as well. Obviously those in power tend to sort of influence the way that the underlings see things. But there's a lot of people who will argue that this character was absolutely a true character, that this person existed, that his actions were true, that they happened, that there were supposedly eyewitnesses. But unfortunately, all of that isn't so accurate. And what I would like to do now is turn to a source. I have a source here. It's ChristianityDisproved.com. If you've not been to this website, I strongly suggest going to this website. I've been to it a number of times, and the information in here is well searched, it's well researched, and it's really well put together. It's a, what is it, one, two, three, four, five, six-part website where you can look at science, the brain, God, the Bible, Jesus, and hell, and why all of these things are not as they appear. So what I'd like to do now is I'm actually going to go into the screen share to do this, because I want our viewers to have the opportunity to look at what I'm looking at. So as you can see here, this is Christianity Disproved section. If you go under Jesus, this is a sublink called "Was Jesus a Myth?" And what I'd like to do now is read this top paragraph, and you can see here there's some comparison charts that we'll get to in just a moment. Scholars of world religion and mythology detect numerous parallels between the stories of heroes and gods from widely different cultures and periods. Tales of mortal heroes who ultimately become gods characterize the ancient traditions of Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, Greece, and Rome, as well as the native cultures of Mesoamerica and North America. In comparing the common elements found in the world's heroic myths, scholars discern a number of repeated motifs that form a distinctive pattern. And then you can come down to this chart and take a look here. There's a couple of characters: Hercules, Perseus, Jesus. Mother is a human, applicable to all of them. Father is a god, applicable to all of them. Circumstances of conception, birth are unusual amongst all of them. Attempt is made to kill him as a child, common among all of them. Conducts superhuman feats, common among all of them. Attains a form of immortality, common among all of them. And then here's the interesting part, is the evidence of these stories existing. So 1250 BCE for, I'm going to probably pronounce this wrong, but Dionysus. Dionysus. Thank you very much. I'm horrible with these other languages and pronunciations.
Heracles.
No, Heracles, 620 BC, and then Perseus, 540. And look at this, Jesus, 125 CE. So you can see that there's a very big time gap in between the creation of the Jesus character as opposed to some of these older myths that exist in the past. Then there's also an example of... Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm even wondering what they mean by physical evidence, because the only physical evidence I can think of from 125 CE is maybe some of the 2nd century texts of the Gospels. But as far as physical evidence of Jesus, we don't have anything at all.
It would.
Mhm.
It's probably. I'm inclined to agree with you, and I'm pretty sure that this is phrased like that for a layman audience, which isn't an excuse necessarily, but so much as to say it's just to get a grasp on, maybe there were
saying the
different
splinter
things.
of the cross that I bought is not real?
Unfortunately, Dave. But yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because we're going to actually do a whole big thing into the differences of evidence, whatnot, in just a short while. So, folks, keep that in mind as we go forward. So let's look now at the parents of these characters. Could you guys pronounce that name for me one more time? Dionysus, is that right?
Dionysus.
Okay,
Yeah.
Dionysus. Semele, is that right?
Semele, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and then Acmene is Hercules. Diane is Perseus, and Mary is Jesus. So you can see here that human mother. And then Godfather, Zeus has been getting around apparently, but Jesus is Yahweh. So and then here's an example of the circumstances that are unusual. Dionysus born from Zeus's thigh after being transferred from his mother. Hercules, Zeus extends the night for 3 days to impregnate the mother. Perseus, Zeus impregnates Danae in a shower of golden rain, which kind of takes on a horrible idea nowadays, but
Oh my!
Yeah. And then Jesus, of course, we know the story of sending the Holy Spirit and whatnot. And then here's, of course, the examples of the murders: Hera with Dionysus and Hercules, and then Chryseis for Perseus and Herod for Jesus. So I think you guys get the point of what we're getting at here, is that there is a lot of similarities between characters that are much, much older than the Jesus character that line up with the Jesus character, which is very typical. It's a lot easier to take from what has already existed than to come up with something original, as any artist will probably tell you. As we go back here to this page one more time, if you guys want, we can take a closer look at Dionysus versus Jesus. Regarding Jesus and Dionysus, their received life stories reveal components of an archetypal pattern, including the hero's birth to a divine parent, his narrow escape from attempts to kill him as an infant, his missing formative years, his sudden appearance as a young adult manifesting miraculous gifts, his struggle with evil forces, his return to his place of origin, commonly resulting in rejection, his betrayal, suffering, and death, and his elevation to divine status, followed by the establishment of a new cult honoring his name. Kind of sounds like John Connor along the Terminator plot. If you ask me, but nonetheless, let's take a look here at Dionysus versus Jesus, and you'll see some more of these comparisons. Is the son of Zeus king of the Greek gods? Is the son of the supposed one god of Christianity? A virgin princess, Phoebus, versus the Virgin Mary. So you got that idea of virgin conception going on in both stories. Survives an attempt by Hera to kill him. Survives an attempt by King Herod to kill him. Performs miracles to inspire faith in his divinity, performs healing and other miracles which resulted in people having faith in his divinity, battles supernatural evil in the form of titans, resists Satan, exorcises demons, so you could call that battling if you want. Returns to his birthplace where he's denied. Can you say that again?
Well, Paul says that he's battling supernatural powers. Right.
Returns to his birthplace where he's denied and rejected by family and former neighbors. Returns to his hometown where he is rejected and threatened with death. Invents wine, promotes his gift to humanity throughout the world. Transforms water into wine. Makes the sacred beverage in communion. So they're trying to be like, yeah, well, you invented it. Yeah, well, we can make other stuff wine.
You know what's funny about that is actually it's even more blatant than that. The miracle of turning water into wine was one that was done by priests of Dionysus. So it's not just, it's even more of a parallel than what it's saying here.
Right.
Yep.
So, suffers wounding and death at the hands of Titans, suffers wounding and death and crucifixion at the hands of the Romans, descends into the underworld, rises to divine immortality, joining his father Zeus on Olympus, resurrected to glory, reigns in heaven at God's right hand, evangelizes the world, establishing his universal cult, directs followers to evangelize the world, punishes opponents who denied his divinity, will return to pass judgment on non-believers. And then here's again for the timetable, 13th century BCE, first century CE, so you can get a really good look at the time differentiation between these two stories. It's a great amount of time here. And you know, this whole thing, the reason I wanted to bring up this section is because that section really demonstrates how much of the Jesus myth could have or was taken from other mythologies, lending to the hindrance of the credibility of the stories, in my opinion.
Yeah, if you don't believe the Zeus stories, suddenly you hear this other story about another guy, Jesus. It follows the same pattern. It does take away from the credibility for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's like I said, it's really hard to look at one here and go, well, well, I mean, it's not hard for me, but for some people, it's really hard to look at one here and go, well, that's completely fake, because we know the Greeks just had mythology. We know that the world doesn't work this way, you know. We know there were no Titans. We know there were no divinely inspired things in the names of these gods, and that gods don't sleep with women and whatnot. That's all fake. And then they'll
snakes and angels, that shit's all real.
Yeah, they'll turn around and go, well, no, I mean, science doesn't have all the answers when it comes to Jesus, and science doesn't have all the answers when it comes to how he could have done all these miraculous things and come back from the dead. You just got to have faith that it happened. You know, that's where my big problem lies, is the hypocrisy of it all.
And I always love how Christians who swallow that become like hyper skeptics when it's anybody else's miracles but their own. It always kills
Brandon
me.
back, so as I mentioned, there might have been some technical difficulties, so welcome back, Brandon.
Sign me out, weird.
Well, you know how it happens.
It does.
But yeah, so ultimately here, when you look at how many stories have similar credentials, with Dionysus might being the biggest one in comparison to Jesus, you can really get a grasp of how many of these stories are the way they are because of the stories that came before them. And it's not, as he was saying, a far-fetched comparison to draw the hero stories from these kinds of things as well. Things like Superman, where he is some sort of powerful being that is brought to humanity in order to help them in some fashion, that they typically go through some grueling punishment, are rejected, and eventually rise to a heroic status, if not a divine status. So knowing that these stories all share the common bonds, the common connections that make them stories in mythology, the commonalities of them all intertwined with the notion of improbability, makes this really hard to process at a realistic level for me. Is
Sure.
what I think is really the big thing here. I want to go to the comments real quick and see if we've got anything. Kieran Candoza says, have you tried listening to the late comparative mythologist Alan Watts' lectures on Jesus, his religion, and karma of Christ? I have not. Have any of you guys on the panel heard of these?
No, I haven't.
I mean, I'm familiar with Alan Watts. Alan Dundas does a examination of Christian myths and legends as folklore, which is an interesting thing, and he
Right.
brings up a lot of these parallels as well.
We have Belzer 1978 asking us if we can see something he has been trying to send some of us. He says there's better evidence for Allah. Unfortunately, we're not looking at Allah tonight, so maybe in another episode we'll get into that. He says he sent us some kind of chart, and he was asking Dave and me to check our inboxes, so I'll get back to that in a little bit. What I'd like to do now, if you guys would be interested in doing this, because I think we can get into this really quickly, is debut our new segment called Devil's Advocate. Basically, I'm gonna go into the screen here because I like to use these little graphics and whatnot. This one, Devil's Advocate, is a really simple gimmick that we came up with to try to influence some discussion and real-time debate on the show. So what we're going to be doing today, considering that the topic is the existence of Jesus, whether or not it was or was not a thing, we invited David Fitzgerald on, and one of the things he's going to be helping us with is debunking some common arguments in favor of Jesus. Now, what I've pulled up on this lovely tab here are 4 pieces of supposed evidence for Jesus, and then hoaxes, fakes, and frauds, so we can talk a little bit about those because I think those are quite important as well. The first section being biblical evidence, which we're going to have fun with that. The second section being non-biblical evidence. The third section being apologist evidence, and the fourth one being archaeological evidence. So David, if you're ready to do this, I am ready to do this as well.
Bring it.
Okay, so we'll start here with biblical evidence. Using the Bible as partial bibliographical evidence of Jesus is not as completely insane or wall-bangingly circular as it may first seem. I highly doubt that. Although the Gospels are generally published in one compendium known as the Bible, there are separate documents and almost certainly were written by separate authors. There are also non-canonical Gospels, such as the Gnostic Gospels, that also attest to Jesus' existence. Though the early church excluded these texts when the Bible was being compiled, historians see them as fully relevant to the question. Now, I have a problem.
Wait,
I have a
stop
problem.
right there.
Yeah, I have a problem already because of the generalization of historians, implying all historians. I have a problem with that generalization right off the bat.
Plus the fact that no historians take them as relevant to the question. Yeah.
I think if they did, we would have a much different perspective of history if that was suddenly relevant.
Sure. I mean, some of these Gospels have Jesus being 500 feet tall and the cross comes out of the grave and talking. It's like, yeah, these are...
Absolutely. When it starts to mention bringing also in the Gnostic Gospels, that's exactly what I thought of. If you're going to try and say that those things say something about Jesus, then what about all the other crazy things they say?
For sure. And it kind of boomerangs, because if you look at the Gnostic Gospels, one of them from the Nag Hammadi library, that cache of early Christian literature that was discovered in Egypt, is a book called the Wisdom of Eustanos, the Sophia of Jesus Christ. It's two different books. One is a pagan text of wisdom, and the other is a half-finished Christian book that is taking this pagan book and turning it into a Jesus story. You know, it's taking Eustanos' disciples and saying, Matthew said blah, blah, blah. It's taking Eustanos' answers and saying, and Jesus answered blah, blah, blah. It's such a smoking gun for how these things were created, starting in the 2nd century and later.
Yeah, it's like catching the scribes in creating the lie.
We literally are doing that again because it's half finished. They didn't get the chance to finish it, and so we've got it all right there.
Right. And, you know, I think the other idea here to consider is that we're dealing with a supposedly biblical character in Jesus, a book that is supposed to be considered the holiest of holy books, the absolute truth, the unquestionable facts of the universe by some. And here we have books that were clearly either not included or, as you guys were talking about, not finished, that are now all of a sudden relevant, even though they're not part of the book that you consider. They weren't good enough for some reason to make it into the ultimate book of the universe, but they're still relevant. That's where my problem with that whole idea of it lies. If they weren't good enough to make it into your book to define your character, what makes them relevant now that they're out of the book? I think, if anything, that's just going to hinder your case by even mentioning, by even knowing, by them even existing, for that matter, that's going to hinder your case way more than that's going to help it.
I mean, we already have 4 books in the New Testament that already conflict with each other, so they can't all be right. You know, it just gets worse and worse when you throw in all these other 2nd century and 3rd century and 4th century ones, you know. If
we go back to the Christianity Disproven website, I'm not going to tab over to it because I don't have it open, but there, under the Bible section, there's actually a very good disillusion of how the New Testament books disagree with each other on certain events.
Sure.
For those of you who might be interested. So let's go back to the evidence feature. We'll start with we weren't done with this first paragraph, I'm sorry. Because of the way cultures have told their religious and mythic stories over time, and based in no small part on studies of modern new religions, especially cult religions, and how they deify their own leaders, most scholars of biblical history believe that the Gospels of the Bible are sufficient evidence to say that Jesus, or some human seed for the stories who we may as well tag Jesus, did exist, and his existence can be assumed from them. And if such a person existed... Okay, go ahead.
Stop right there. Wait. Okay.
This is entertaining.
When anyone says anything like most scholars of biblical history, the first thing you have to realize is, well, who are most scholars of biblical history? Most scholars of biblical studies have, from the beginning and ever have been, biblical employees. Yeah, they've been Christian clergy, Catholic clergy. They come out of some tradition. Even most of the secular historians originally came out of a religious tradition. like myself included, like Bart Ehrman, like Richard Carrier.
In the employ of faith.
Say that again, Dave?
In the employ of faith.
Absolutely. It's like, yeah, of course they're going to say it's good evidence because they not only is he their savior, he's also their employer, you know.
Yeah.
So
you're not going to publish an article about how crappy your boss is in the magazine that he runs.
well, it's like
know?
that's a serious bias that I don't even think most people realize, that when you're talking about the majority of biblical scholars, you're talking about the same guys that say that evolution is fake today. You know?
Yeah.
Some. That's a generalization as well.
That is an overstatement, but the point still stands that this is who we're talking about. We're not talking about guys in lab coats, you know, working on their computers. We're talking about your preacher, you know.
Whenever it comes down to the idea that you're looking for the evidence to fit the answer rather than you find the answer based on the evidence, you're going to run into complications. And when you go into a scenario looking for Jesus because he is described in here, you know, the old cliche about you're going to find what you look for really comes into play here, because you are going to find what you look for. That's why we've had 8,000,001 people find Jesus' tomb or Jesus' cross or parts of the ark. You know, when you look for something, you're going to find it, is what really comes into play here for me. So let's go back to yes. And if such a person existed, it is equally likely that the major broad themes are based in reality. He likely would have...
Right there! Whoa! Whoa! The broad theme. First of all, they don't agree with each other on what the broad themes are. I mean, yeah.
There's 30,000 sects of Christianity.
And I mean, what broad themes are we talking about? Are we talking about the themes where Jesus implies that the Old Testament is completely relevant? Are we talking about the themes where Jesus does his healing? Are we talking about the greater themes that are like just love everybody and don't judge unless you want to judge people that don't believe the same way as you and whatnot?
And since when did the agreement mean that it was real? All the Greek myths agree with each other that Zeus is the king of the gods. Does that mean he's really the king of the gods?
Yeah.
Does that mean he exists at all?
All the Harry Potter books agree with each other. Does that mean Harry Potter exists?
Thank you.
The Spider-Man comics, I'll say it was Peter Parker. Peter Parker running around New York City.
So uncanny accuracy of New York City.
Yeah. So, he likely would have been one of the many teachers or self-proclaimed prophets of the time, and he probably ticked off the wrong people and found himself dead. It is likely that the rest is highly embellished, made up, or recycled from other mythology.
And to be honest, that's exactly what I was thinking 12 years ago. Yeah, I don't think that now anymore.
Yeah. So we've got all the evidence in the world for it being borrowed from other mythology. All you got to do is go back in the video about 20 minutes. So we'll start with Paul. Paul is the first section here under evidence. The earliest writings about Jesus, traditionally dated 52 to 67 CE, earlier than any Gospels, canonical or not, come from Paul of Tarsus, a man who never met a physical Jesus, but who claimed to have seen a light and heard a voice. This conversation...
Actually, he never claimed to have seen a light and heard a voice. Luke said that he claimed that.
Yep.
He never tells us any story remotely like that.
So you're dealing with hearsay right off the bat.
Exactly.
And that's always a reliable source.
Yeah.
So go with the hearsay, children.
Well, let's keep going, because I'm sure it has more fun things we need to talk about.
Right. No, we got all time here. So this conversation is accepted by Christian doctrine on its face.
Conversion.
And as proof that Jesus not... Oh, sorry. This conversion is accepted by Christian doctrine on its face and as proof that Jesus not only existed but was risen as the Messiah. The same Christians do not accept other religions' similar versions as fact. No witnesses to this conversion event are mentioned.
Well, that's not true. They do mention them in the story, but they don't say who these guys are. Again, Paul never says anything like this ever happened, so he says everything he knows about Jesus came from personal visions and from Scripture, from revelations and from Scripture.
The earliest writer of the Christian faith doesn't describe Jesus as a real man.
But there you go. He never even uses the word disciples. And in fact, the only thing we have in his dealings with the leaders of the Jerusalem church, who are supposedly Jesus' followers and relatives, he opposes them. He says they're not real Christians. He says they bring in spies to spy on us true Christians, you know. And he says, I didn't give in to them for a minute. It's astounding the things he has to say about the guys who were supposedly hung around Jesus and were related to Jesus.
And this is the guy who was supposedly the author of so much of the Bible.
Right. So we know that half of what's attributed to him was not written by him.
Right. So I mean, that's kind of what the whole point of this whole thing, though, isn't it? That it might not be what it seems. So, for the sake of the audience's discretion, do we have a source for all of this material on Paul and whatnot? Can people go somewhere to find all of this information that you're talking about?
Well, again, that great book, Nailed, that Dave Fitzgerald wrote, is a nice start.
Robert M. Price's book is good.
Robert Price, anything by Robert Price is awesome, especially his books Deconstructing Jesus and The Incredible Shrinking Son of Man.
Yep.
Richard Carrier, his book Proving History, and his forthcoming book on the historicity of Jesus, I think are going to blow anybody off the fence after that. They're either going to say yes or no, but there's not going to be any wondering about it after that.
Well, then I'll make sure to drop some of those links on the Mind of an Atheist Facebook page when we get all done here. So, let's keep going.
Okay.
Paul had no knowledge of Jesus' early life, just his claimed ultimate activities and his teachings, sometimes seen at variance with those.
Stop. He doesn't have any indication of his teachings. There's, I think, only 4 times he even mentions something that comes from Jesus. He never says Jesus taught this. He always says these are commandments from the Lord. So we don't even know if he's talking about God or Jesus, his Lord. But even when he's done this, we don't have, they don't always match up with anything Jesus said. And often he disagrees with what Jesus said.
Yep.
And plus he describes all these fights that are going on in the early church that supposedly were already settled by Jesus in the Gospels. So we know that there's lots of retrofitting in the Gospels.
Right. Okay. So let's
just
keep
saying.
Let's see if I
just saying.
No, that's I want you to just say that's great stuff. And sometimes seemed at variance with those of Jesus in the Gospels. He also does not mention the handful of churches that arose in Jesus' name, but having nothing to do with his own Christianity. Although Paul writes about numerous other people seeing Jesus, he provides no corroborating evidence or means by which they could be identified. He does...
What's in that? Wait, let me stop you there. Stop you there, because what he gives us at just one point, is a laundry list of people who saw the risen Christ. He doesn't say these guys saw Jesus. He doesn't say they hung out with Jesus or was part of his ministry, or he never even mentioned such a thing. And he says that he describes the way they saw Jesus the same way he saw Jesus, through visions and revelations and reading the scripture. So it's a very problematic laundry list for starters.
Yeah.
But you were saying?
Oh, yes, I was just,
Actually, this whole page it's really showing how these presuppositions about Jesus are so easy to infiltrate into even the most basic discussion about Jesus.
Right.
When you talk about the sources for his information.
Right, and that's really...
reading through a gospel lens and not taking it at what it's really saying.
Yeah. And that's a really good way to put it, the gospel lens, sort of like drinking the Kool-Aid of your eyes, if you will, for a really weird comparison that ruined the first good one. Sorry about that. But anyway, he does, in Galatians, speak of meeting some of the disciples, which is evidence for their existence.
I gotta stop you right there. I'm
should I
sorry.
stop, or...
I'm sorry. We're never going to finish this page.
No, please.
What he says
it's
is...
fine.
He never uses the word disciples. He never hints that these guys had any relationship more special than his. The closest we get to anything Paul says about a historical Jesus, and really it's the only single thing I think that the historicists can say for sure that's on their side, and it's arguable, is when he calls James the brother of the Lord. He doesn't say he's Jesus' brother. And again, just a few verses later, he's treating this guy like...
Yeah. I think we
a technical issue.
we had a little bit of lag there.
And what's more, he's not the only person that's referred to as a brethren of the Lord. Like, there's 500 brethren of the Lord mentioned in the New Testament in that laundry list of Paul's. There's all the apostles are considered his brethren. So when we see that word brethren, it's almost always in a spiritual sense, not in a physical sense. And in fact, the only time we seem to see it in a physical sense is when the Gospels are describing Jesus' brothers and sisters in the Gospels, but not in Paul. We don't get that in Paul.
Right. So let's
Good point.
keep going here. Yeah, you're getting some great stuff right now. This is probably our most segment ever. So that.
Sorry. Can you just shut up? I'll sit quietly for a little bit.
No, it's good.
No, please. This is exactly what I was hoping you would do. So, depending on how one interprets Galatians, he actually refers to James the Just as Jesus' brother, which, since Paul met James, would be fairly solid evidence for Jesus' existence.
Some big ifs going
Should
on
I keep
there.
going?
Yeah.
Okay.
And for
Paul
what it's
also
worth,
conveys that the earliest.
oh, I was
Go
just
ahead.
going to say, for what it's worth, I do believe that James the Just was a real person, and I believe he was an early Christian leader in Jerusalem.
That
Right.
makes sense.
I just don't think he was
There's
Jesus'
some
brother.
stuff around there. Sorry about that. Right. No. That's a big difference. There could have been some characters from this book that were real and others that weren't. You know what I mean? You can have a character, like, I'm pretty sure that we all believe that humanity is a thing, humanity is in the Bible, but that just because something lines up, for the record, just because something lines up here that might fit with what biblical people say doesn't mean it all lines up, where that even if a little bit of it does, that we should take it all on a factual basis. I think that's an important disclaimer.
And Paul himself is a good example of that, because almost everything Paul says in his genuine letters is contradicted by Luke, who says something else completely and tries to paint a different picture of him.
Right. Okay, so keep going here. Paul also conveys that the earliest Christians tended to ecstatic trances, proselytize. Wow, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry about it. Prophesizing. Yeah, I don't know why I couldn't read that. Relaying the communications of spirits and speaking in tongues, so much so that outsiders thought they were lunatics. The whole book of Revelation, for example, is a veritable acid trip, and yet got into the Bible as an authoritative document. Not only were they channeling spirits and speaking in tongues and having visions of angels and strange objects in the sky, aliens, they were putting on faith-healing acts and exorcising demons by laying on hands and shouting words of power. This tendency to ecstatic religious experiences, seeing the Son of God in visions, dreams, and trances might bring doubt to their reliability as witness to that same Son of God's real-world existence.
That whole paragraph is perfect. Everything they say is true.
Okay. So they kind of, like, under the evidence for, give us all the evidence against.
Wow.
Good job.
They got one thing right.
They got one thing right, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so Paul's out of the way, and I think everybody who wants to know about Paul now has a cannonball of information on whether or not there was any factual basis there. So, next we're looking at evidence from the Gospels, which I guess is a little bit, and it says see also authorship of the New Testament. So, by the way, this is coming from a website called rationalwiki.org for anyone who's interested in where I'm finding this. Interesting title, but nonetheless. So they suggest going authorship of the New Testament, which is another day. The authors of the four canonical Gospels appear to be well-educated later writers who were skilled in Greek composition, writing about what they had heard, and doing so in religio-politically motivated ways.
Stop right there.
Since they were not
Stop
witnesses to... Okay,
Stop right
go
there.
ahead. Nope, you're good.
When he says writing about what they had heard, that's a common spin that this was all coming from oral tradition, but that idea has fallen out of favor with historians because it's become very obvious that these things weren't based on hearsay and weren't based on oral tradition, but that they're literary works and that they're all based originally on Mark's original gospel.
And the other didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
The other point that they were saying that they appear to be well versed authors. This goes against the traditional people who they say wrote the
Who
books
to be illiterate.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah,
So,
Dave makes a perfect point there.
So I got to ask, because a little fuzzy on that part, but what you had said, David, was that the historians tend to believe that they other books were written based off of what was written in Mark.
Right. It falls to a thing called the
Documentary.
synoptic problem. And
Okay.
what the synoptic problem is, in a nutshell, is that when you look at the three synoptic gospels, it's Mark, Matthew, and Luke, it becomes really obvious that Matthew and Luke have taken Mark's gospel and have reworked it, changed it around, but basically they've kept it completely intact. Matthew has 90% of the Gospel of Mark intact, and Luke has 50%. And the changes they make are corrections, like the mistakes Mark makes and the mistakes Mark's Jesus makes, they correct them. They add their own material, like especially the nativity stories, even though the two nativity stories completely contradict each other. In fact, when they're not cutting and pasting Mark, they're completely taking it in directions that are completely contradictory with each other. So these guys weren't even trying. They weren't even trying to make their gospels match up. They weren't even trying to set up their own gospel. Matthew, I'm convinced, was just trying to fix the only gospel he knew of into a better form, of Mark 2.0.
So basically, it's them taking their ideas and adding it to their own and making their own version of the story.
Exactly.
Oh, sounds familiar.
And here's the thing. Here's the other crazy thing: is we're talking about Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Originally, all these names, these gospels, were anonymous. And those names were tacked on 100 years later in the 2nd century, or years and years later, anyway, by the church. But none of them claim to be eyewitnesses. All of them have giveaways that they're being written generations after the fact. Luke even starts his by saying, so many people are writing gospels these days, it seemed like a good idea for me to go and get the real story and check it out and examine it. But that's not what he does. He just steals Matthew and Mark's gospel.
Sherlock Holmes, you might call him.
For his own...
Yeah.
Well, thank you for shedding light on that for me.
Thank you.
Yeah. We had Michael Sherlock in the comments, friend of the show, kind of summarizing a little bit of that too, saying the entire corpus of literature that testifies to Jesus' earthly existence are four short and conflicting biographies: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So we had that comment come up earlier on in the comments, and I wanted to let people know that that was in there. I also want to let everybody know that we are going to read some more comments at intermission. When we get to intermission, I'll read some of the other comments that are in here. But anyway, are we good to keep going?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me see. Let me try to figure out where we were. Oh yeah. Since they were not witnesses to any event, the works must be read as secondhand knowledge only.
For sure.
Gross geographical and cultural errors suggest that the author of Mark after 70 CE had never visited and knew very little about Palestine.
Absolutely right.
The authors of Matthew.
Sea of Galilee is a little lake.
It's a freshwater lake. It was never called the Sea of Galilee before Mark wrote his gospel. It was called Lake Chinnereth before then.
Mhm.
Chinnereth.
Yeah. Tomato. Where was I? The authors of Matthew, end of the 1st century, and Luke, end of the 1st century, got most of their info from Mark. Luke appearing to be a local. That's kind of what we just talked about.
Sure.
And
I think those were written even later than into the 1st century. Matthew probably in the 1st century. Luke probably early 2nd century.
Yeah,
John,
I agree. Those are early dates.
Yeah.
All right. So. And who also wrote about Paul in Acts of the Apostles and the Lost Q Gospel, often copying Mark verbatim. John was synthesized later based on the same story, but rewritten around 110 CE. The Gospel stories.
I think possibly Luke was written around that time. I think Luke was probably written even later than that. John much later than that. Yes. I think probably in the 30s or 40s. And there was something else I was going to say, but let me see that page again.
Sure. If it would date or something about the apostles or the Q Gospel, the Lost Q Gospel.
Correcting
John
errors.
synthesized later on.
Oh, about the Q Gospel, the Lost Q Gospel. Well,
yes.
We've never found the Q Gospel. I don't think there ever was a Q Gospel.
So you think it's sort of like a red herring type deal?
I think it is, and I think it's usually attached to another theory that's very well established, and that's the priority of Mark. That's definitely on. But this whole Q thing, I agree with those scholars who say that Q is nothing more than the places where Luke is stealing from Matthew and from Mark.
Mm-hmm. So,
For what it's worth.
can you tell us a little bit about what the Q gospel is and what it was or supposedly was?
It was supposed to be an answer to the synoptic problem. They're saying, well, maybe the reason that all these three gospels line up is because they used a different source, you know, because we can't have them ripping each other off. That wouldn't, surely that didn't happen, you know, but that's exactly what happened, is they're ripping each other off, you know.
Right.
The later ones are ripping off the younger ones.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
so they hypothesized that there was a gospel that they called Q for Quelle, which is German for source, and they hypothesized that was where they got all this other material. But no one's ever found it, and I don't think anyone ever will, because I don't think it existed.
Okay. Gospel stories do not line up. In multiple narratives, it's expected that there will be things that do not match, but corroborations across authors lend credence to each other, to each event of the person's life. With the Gospels, the only time they agree on events is when they have been copied nearly word for word. Even if historians, even if historians assume these are good sources, which book is to be trusted about the events of his life? This leads other historians to suggest that most of the story was invented and mythologized for effect.
Yeah. I don't want to give a spoiler alert, but I'm just going to jump in right here and say it goes into something that Robert Price says, that even if there was a real historical Jesus, for all extents and purposes, there isn't one anymore, because everything we know about that guy who lived in the 1st century, supposedly, comes from these 4 jokers who clearly are not connected with any real person who ever lived at all.
Mm-hmm. Right. We have Victoria Z in the comments saying, don't forget, there are way more than just a few rejected books that were used as canon law for 2 centuries that have even more contradicting information.
Yeah, so absolutely. Good call, Victoria.
Yeah, there's more than 24 that were rejected as something like that, right?
And those are just the ones we know about. There's about 35 that I can think of that we have evidence for, or we still have, or that they're mentioned by others. But, I mean, again, those are just the ones we knew about from the 2nd century. If we hadn't found the Nag Hammadi Gospels, and that was a total luck out that we found those, we would have no idea, or just guesswork, about how different early Christianity was from what we call Christianity, and before it got whipped in line by the Orthodox, what we call Orthodox.
Right. I like that image for some reason. That's funny to me. Whipped in line. I don't know. I don't know what I mean. Mark, the earliest gospel, mentions nothing of Jesus' early life beginning with Jesus' ministry. It appears not to discuss Jesus' rising at all. Linguists have argued that the mention of the risen Jesus Mark was added. Many parts of the Gospels were added after their first version, such as the end of Mark 16 and the story of Jesus saying, "Let he without sin cast the first stone."
Right. It's not even just the linguistic argument that proves that. I mean, our best and earliest manuscripts don't have anything after Mark 16 verse 8, so we know that was not. That's where it originally ended, or at least as far back as we can know, that's where it originally ended.
Right.
And later endings were made up later that came, centuries later.
Okay.
At least 2 that we know of.
This next part is going to be very interesting to me because it is titled Gospels as History. So this could be either way. I feel like that in the middle there was sort of like the other side of the debate. So I'm kind of hoping that this one will go back a little bit. But before we get into that, it's right about the halfway mark for the show. So what we're actually going to do now that we've reached the halfway mark, I'm going to turn off the screen share for just a moment so I can actually talk to you lovelies. Since we are at the halfway mark, what we're going to do now is take our typical 10-minute break, which means basically the host and I, the panel and I, are just going to take 10 minutes to cool off, get ourselves collected, and regroup and come back for the second half. But don't go anywhere. Don't leave. The video's not changing streams or links or anything. It's going to be right here. When we come back, we're going to finish off this Devil's Advocate whatnot. And then we're going to do some other stuff, including going over Josephus, which was a request made by a friend of the show, Travis, who was actually on last week's episode. Brandon and I are going to go through some Josephus arguments, let you guys decide what you think about him. Like I said, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. And while we're on intermission, after I come back, I will read some of the comments here that we didn't get to during the first half of the show. So I'm going to ask our panel for silence, throw yourselves on mute, and we will be back in just 10 short minutes. Don't go anywhere. I'm really happy to see us capping at 22 viewers right now. This is the highest we've had in a couple of weeks. So thanks everybody who's watching. Don't go anywhere, and we will be right back with more quality content for you. Howdy, everybody. I'm back. Just got myself another drink real quick. Brandon, what were you looking at? I don't even want to know. So, as promised, I'm going to go to the comments real quick and read some of these comments from our viewers. Belzer, I'll check the inbox when I get an opportunity. I'm not on Facebook, and I can't look at the YouTube inbox right now without my thing going laggy. So after the show, I'll check the inboxes for whatever it is that you're trying to send us. Let's see. Michael Sherlock says, I'm probably going to pronounce his name wrong, but I think we probably have Eusebius to thank for the false picture of early Christianity we have today.
Eusebius.
Eusebius, thank you very much. I'm really bad with these names. My speciality is logical pathways, not names.
You're barking up the wrong tree tonight, I tell you.
Yeah, I know. Typically, I'm so good at this too. That's the worst part. The best part about it all is the missing body, says Belzer. Stealth 6 says causation does not equal correlation in relation to the discussion we had about part of the Bible being right to all of it being right. Belzer says his comments got marked as spam. I don't know why. That's the other users, dude. I'm not doing anything. None of us are doing anything.
Yeah, I didn't mark it.
Truth Explained, which is Tom, friend of the show, says Truth Saves website is another great resource for debunking this kind of stuff. So there's that. Viper says we all know that Jesus lives in United States prisons. Stealth 6 raises an interesting question. What proof is there that Mary was a virgin? Small point maybe, but maybe she was good at covering up and claimed God did it. So that's fun. Victoria Z says, going off that last comment of people not born of virgins and ghosts, I'm pretty sure if there was a movie made about that, it'd be a horror movie. Examples, American Horror Story plot. So that's kind of... It's funny to think about the Bible as a horror story. It's like those people who remade the Mrs. Doubtfire trailer as a horror movie. That was kind of like that kind of thing. If you've never seen that, I encourage our audience to go check out Mrs. Doubtfire redone as a horror movie. It was one of the funnier teaser videos I've seen.
You have to post that link to that because that's
awesome.
I'll put it on the Mind of an Eighth Facebook when we're done here.
I don't know if you guys
just remind me.
If you guys know the horror writer Ray Garton, are any of you guys familiar with him?
Say who it is
Ray
again?
Garton.
I know I'm not.
No.
He's written a book of religious horror stories that are just awesome.
Really?
Totally worth watching. It's called Wailing and Gnashing of Teeth.
Okay. I'll me a link to some of it. I can put all this. I'm just gonna make a big post for like today's posts of the day and just put it all in that one big post.
Well, that's a great idea.
Belzer says, "Can I join the hangout?" You can't join the show, but you can join the post-show hangout, Belzer, when it's all set and done.
We'll post the link.
Yeah, you'll be able to join in and talk to us about whatever you want when the show is over. Although we typically dedicate about half an hour to the post-show of continuing what was going on with the show, and the other half having a little fun. So,
I've got a friend in Norway who's listening in, and
hello.
The same question.
Hello, Norway friend.
You cut out there for a
Shout out
second,
to
David.
Daniel.
You missed the last half.
Daniel in
Shout
Norway.
out to Daniel.
Yeah. Shout out. Daniel is his friend from Norway that asked the same question about joining the post-show hangout. So, yes, Daniel, you'll be able to join the post-show. Anybody, we can have up to 10 people at a time, and it is first come, first serve. So if you're trying to get into the post-show hangout, there's going to be links when the show is over on the image that is on the Facebook page. It'll be exactly the same place that you found the YouTube link, and there will also be one in the channel. If you go to the channel, you'll see a link for the post-show hangout. Make sure you click the most recent link and give us about 5 minutes after the show goes off air to post that link, because there are old ones that are existing and they'll take you to dead places on the internet that don't exist anymore. So be very careful about letting us get the official link up. And like I said, it's up to 10 people, first come, first serve. We love to talk with anyone who's been watching about what they heard on the show, what they haven't heard on the show. We'll talk about just about anything. So
well, that's where you really reach people, is when you're talking when there's an interactive element. Like, although your talks are amazing, David, at Skepticon and stuff like that, but yeah, the interactive really, because if somebody has something that really is bothering them, they can ask you about it, and then you can respond. So I really enjoy the back and forth with people.
Me too. Me too.
It's a lot of fun to do this show, and especially when we have a lot of viewers. Like we have 25, 26 now. So I mean, this is when we have a big audience like this, so we can actually get a message across to and have them come in and leave comments and get back to it. It's a lot of fun. So we've hit 9:05, so we're good to continue the second half. I want to pick up where we left off with the Devil's Advocate segment. So. Yep. I'm going to go back into the lovely little screen share so I can pull up this graphic that I made earlier and this article. So where we left off before we went on intermission break was we were about to tackle the Gospels as history, which we didn't pre-read, so this could be anything. It's going to be interesting to see where this goes, and it looks like we're going to be talking more about Matthew versus Luke, which is interesting, and other timelines as well. So Gospels as history, let's do this panel. As with most religious texts, scholars assume some basic level of reliability on topics like who were the players, what were the major events, and what was the attitude of the community in text intended to represent. And then that's just something about that argument. So,
to be honest, I think that's overstating the facts too. It's like, you know.
Mm-hmm. So. Because the Gospels were deliberately meddled with, mistranslated many times, and changed over the decades of oral traditions, there's no sound basis for accepting any of them into totality as literal, trustworthy, truthful historical documents.
And let me stop you there. And just I just want to point out one quick thing. It's not just that they're not oral traditions, and it's not just that that's why there's sound reasons for not accepting them as historical. Just even textual evidence itself tells us that these are things being written long after the things occurred, but the mistakes that they make show us that it's not historical. For instance, Luke's whole thing about a census under Quirinius. You know, there was a census under Quirinius in the year 6 or 7 AD, but Nazareth wasn't part of the Roman Empire then. Galilee. Right. So there was no reason for that thing to work at all.
And there never has been a census where anybody says, "Oh, you've got to go back to your hometown."
Exactly. We have some evidence for maybe an Egyptian thing happening, something along those lines, but other than that, nothing even close. It'd be ridiculous to even say that. And of course, Luke is the only one saying that. Nobody else is saying that.
Right. We have Palma Tyndall in the comments who's kind of taking us on a side road real quick, who says, what do you make of the possibility of there being a zealot named Yeshua, whom all these claims were attributed to?
Yeah, well, he's reading Reza Aslan's new book, and the problem with it and any other secular reconstruction of Jesus that you want to point to is all of them sound plausible. All of them are plausible until you read the next one. And it's like, yeah, he could have been a zealot. Yeah, he could have been a Galilean shaman. He could have been a feminist. He could have been a rabbi. He could have been all these different things. But he probably wasn't every single one of them all at the same time. And that's a problem.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, is that you're saying a lot of people, when you tell them, I don't believe that Jesus existed, they think you're saying, I know that Jesus didn't exist, and that's not what we're saying. We're saying there's not enough evidence to say that he existed. Right.
And the Jesus they're thinking of half the time is something different from there's the Jesus of faith, there's the Jesus of history, and there's a bajillion Jesuses of history. That
is my next band name.
Yeah. I gotta tell you, I don't have the book out yet, but I'm writing a sequel to Nailed called Jesus Mything in Action, and it's all taking the arguments that I get from our fellow atheists, some of whom get their panties in such a twist, so dogmatic, insisting that there was a real Jesus. And it's like, dude, I could be wrong, but this is why I don't think that's even true, that there was even a dude named Jesus. Right. In fact, the last chapter of my book, Nailed, is...
Technical issue.
Yeah, we have a bit of a technical issue. I'm gonna get him back to finish that thought.
Even if there just was a guy named Jesus.
David, you had a bit of lag that happened that froze you up there, and it stopped you when you said...
the last chapter of your book.
Yeah, It stopped you
I'll
and
take
we
it
didn't
up
catch
from
any
the
of
top
it.
again. Yeah, sorry about that. The last chapter of my book is a chapter called Can Jesus Be Saved? And it points out all the ways that early Christianity, the New Testament, and history would all be differently, even if there had just been a normal human guy named Jesus. I've got an essay online that you can Google up. If you Google up, "Will the real Jesus please stand up?" that will kind of give you a sneak preview of what I'm going for in this follow-up book to Nailed that I'm calling Jesus, Mything in Action. And basically, there's all these evidence for other less interesting loser messiahs, and yet all of them did, for the most part, was get themselves killed. None of them even come close to what is described about Jesus in the Gospels, and yet they make the history books. He doesn't. That's a problem for Christianity. That's a big problem.
Right. All right, so let's keep going here. Palma also suggested that there were some people. Let me just read it verbatim. Aren't there some people claiming Nazareth didn't even exist at that time?
There are. There are. Renee Salm and my good friend Frank Zindler are both convinced that Nazareth didn't exist at that time. I'm going to stay agnostic on that myself. And the main reason is that some of the arguments for that, the most they could say is that, well, whoever wrote about Nazareth in the Gospels clearly had never been to Nazareth.
Right.
I just think there's better arguments to be made about why Jesus didn't exist.
Right.
And I'm not. I mean, maybe it didn't exist, but I don't know. For me, the verdict is still out on that.
Right. Okay. So now that we've taken for that, let's go back to what we were doing here. Because the Gospels were... we already read that, sorry. For these reasons, as a primary historical record, the Christian Gospels are dubious at best. For one, the Gospels themselves are admittedly propagandist, and many other signs truly did Jesus in the presence of the disciple, which are not written in this book, but these are written that ye might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing ye might have thought his name, from John 30-31. The writers peppered the Gospels with Old Testament references. Most details of Jesus' life are Old Testament references.
And I want to stop you there because
yes,
virtually every detail of Jesus' life, they have found parallels and to Old Testament stories.
And you know, that's always very interesting to me to talk about that specifically, because we're dealing here with a religion that says that half of its book is now wiped out because of the second half of it. You know, and if we're looking at Jesus, who is a New Testament character paralleled with Old Testament ideas and perspectives, all of a sudden, if the Old Testament wipes out, where does that leave Jesus in the relationship between important and unimportant? Because if we can suggest that the Old Testament is null and void now that the New Testament has taken place, however, many of the New Testament principles still exist, including Jesus referring to the Old Testament as being true and saying that not a bit of the law is to be abolished, then we've run into sort of a logical paradox here, because we're dealing with a character that exists as the result of a book that no longer matters, that this new character nullified in becoming part of the second book. So it's a really complex scenario here now where we have a character that's advocating one book and denying another book, but not really.
And I'm glad you say character, because, yeah, this guy seems to be a completely literary figure made up by the author of the Gospel of Mark.
Right. So I wanted to bring that up just because a lot of people I know have heard the Old Testament rendered irrelevant by New Testament, and I wanted to bring that up just because of how interesting of a paradox and a fallacy it really actually is to say that. So let's continue here. What is more problematic when the Gospels can be compared with known historical reality? They contradict it. Luke 2:1-4. Sorry, did you want to say something?
No, that's completely accurate.
Okay. Luke 2:1-4 claims Jesus was born in the year of a universal tax census, but the first such census did not occur until 74 CE, and it is not in the other Gospels. Luke 2, King James Version specifically states, and this taxing was first made when Cyrenius was governor of Syria. Cyrenius is the Greek name for Publius Herod's slaughter of the innocents in Matthew 2:16 through 18 is not recorded in any other history. Even Josephus, who really didn't like Herod and wow, I'm sorry,
Meticulously cataloged his other misdeeds.
Meticulously cataloged his other misdeeds. I don't know why I can't read.
I think they may have taken that. I think they may have taken that line from my book Nailed. Actually, I think I say the exact same thing.
That's interesting. That's
Yeah.
kind of like full circle now. I'm kind of.
Isn't it?
Jesus is depicted as hugely popular in the Gospels, yet he is unrecorded by non-biblical historians. That's really important, if you ask me.
Yeah.
That is really important.
Very important.
Because we're dealing with two different worldviews here. We're dealing with worldview A, which suggests that this character not only existed, but was a savior, a son of the divine being who was sent here to restore mankind to its once good glories. And the other side suggests that none of that even matters because it's not true.
Yeah.
So that's very important to note, that the side that has the book goes, well, of course this is true, and the side that rejects the book goes, what? It's really important to note those two perspectives on things.
Yeah.
So let's keep going here. Basically, the rest of this section just different problems that line up here that they don't really fit. And then this final thing. Many of the stories in the Gospels do not make any sense historically, such as the trial and crucifixion on Passover.
Right.
You know, I mean, when you come to a situation here where do not make sense historically, I think you can look at the Bible and find a lot of things that historically don't make sense. Great floods and whatnot.
But that's a really important one. A lot of people may not realize that during the time of Passover, nothing happened civically.
Exactly.
So
that makes a great point. Yeah. And
to promote, go ahead.
It's not just the big ticket items, not just the big miracles. It's these little mundane niggly details that don't pass the reality check.
Mm-hmm.
Even when they all agree with each other. Often we get all these detailed accounts that are completely opposite from each other, too. That's the other thing. When they talk about, oh, but it's so detailed. Yeah, until you read the other guys, and it's completely detailed, saying something else 100%.
We have Michael Sherlock again in the comments saying, also, Herod died 4 to 6 BCE approximately, and, oh, God, Quirinius was made governor of Syria until 7 CE. Quirinius. I really apologize for my botching of everything that comes from another language. That's not my specialty.
It just makes me feel smart. That's all.
Okay.
Yep.
My specialty is logical pathways, not other languages. So, both of which Luke asserts happened simultaneously.
Yeah. Well, it's not quite true. Matthew says that Jesus was born around the death of Herod was still king, so that has to be before 4 or 5 BCE. Luke says that it was in the time of this bullshit, census that could have only happened in 6 or 7 CE.
It's just another one of those details where they disagree with each other, and there's lots.
Exactly, and there's just no two ways these two stories can be true, because boom, that's 10 years difference right there. Right there.
So now, to promote sort of like a discussion value to all this that we've been reading, because we've really been throwing a lot of information at people without a lot of opportunity to really question it and get it into sort of like an appropriate outward vocal opinion here, and factual opinion for that matter. What would you say to someone if after hearing all this information they said, well, you know what, you're just misinterpreting what's really been said, you're taking it too literally, you're taking it way too historically, there are more elements than just logic and logical pathways and whatnot, that would say you got to look at this from a different angle, from a spiritual angle, from a metaphysical angle, from angles outside of just historical facts and logical deduction. What would you say to someone who said there's more to it than this?
Well, be careful when you read Winnie the Pooh and the Harry Potter books, because you can, if you're going to play that game with the book, you can do that with the Book of Mormon, with the Quran, or
you'll come to the same conclusion.
50 Shades of Grey,
Oh,
right.
That's exactly the point I was going to make. If you're gonna stop using logic and evidence and stuff like that, and take these ideas and metaphysical ideas and how you feel about the ideas, if you're gonna treat those as equal to evidence, you can make the same arguments that Christians make for the Bible as for the Quran, for the Bhagavad Gita, for all of them.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
Even the Book of Mormon makes sense when you say it that way. Yeah.
Yes.
And what would you say to a person who's saying that sacred beliefs should be taken more seriously than to compare them to Harry Potter or Spider-Man or whatever else? What would you say to someone who truly believes that their beliefs are sacred and they're not necessarily asserting that they're factual, but deserve at least the amount of respect to be treated as potentially important?
They're wrong.
Why?
Why? Why should I respect a belief, especially when it justifies the hatred of others?
There you go. I mean, by their fruits you shall know them.
Why should I? Yeah. Why should I respect a belief that harms women and treats them as nothing but livestock in a sense?
Absolutely. What Brandon said.
Why should I respect any of that?
Yeah.
I think it was
honestly. You're asking me to sit there and say, "Oh no, respect the fact that I like to treat women like shit."
I think it was a talk
I can't do that.
I think it was a talk by David Silverman. He said, "Respect is earned, and religion hasn't earned any." That's exactly how I feel.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
And there's a lot to be said about when it comes to the respect factor, not respecting something that is clearly trying to promote fallacies that it either acknowledges are there, recognizes that are there, or ignores that are there. For example, the idea is that Jesus was born on December 25th is a bunch of shit. I'm sorry to not sugarcoat it, but it's a bunch of crap. He was not born on December 25th. That was changed later. A lot of evidence suggests that he was born more towards the spring and the summertime, and that the birthday was changed to correlate with other holidays of other religions. You know how that whole
we got to make everybody feel happy in our religion.
Yeah, and so when you can go through and have literal lies like that are lies, like someone escaping from the belly of a whale after a couple of days, and whatever other story, 40-day floods and whatnot. If you can sit there, look me in the eye, and tell me you believe this and you want me to believe it, or else there will be consequences, you're not trying to teach me. You were trying to threaten me. If you are going to come and threaten me with logical fallacies at the result of consequence, punish me now, because I'm not going to subject myself to what I consider to be a lesser standard of thinking simply because you want to put a knife to my throat. If you're going to threaten me with a knife, you might as well cut me a little bit, because if I'm not bleeding, you haven't done your job.
Well said.
You're going to threaten me.
More mini rant. Love
Thank
it.
You.
Yeah. Jeremiah's rant.
You know what? That's the funny part. We didn't even get to Jeremiah's rant of the week yet. So that
could be Jeremiah's mini rant of the week.
Okay. So then this mini rant of the week was brought to you by Jeremiah. So one final thought here on this sort of devil's advocate idea here that we're going with for the show today. What would you say to someone who, after all that, goes, okay, well, even if you're right here, what does it matter if Jesus existed or not? Because the story of Jesus has inspired so many people to do so many good things. The idea of loving thy neighbor, the idea of taking care of the sick and the poor, taking care of the downtrodden, and living amongst the poor in order to understand their lifestyle. What does it matter if he existed if all these good things came as a result of the story?
Yes, because Christianity is nothing but a wellspring of goodness. There's no downside to Christianity whatsoever. Yeah, it's a great question.
Yeah, it is.
Not to mention the stuff that Jesus teaches that people don't know about. I mean, first of all, he advocates that all of the Old Testament should stand, meaning that the laws of Deuteronomy with raped women, that the laws of Leviticus with slaves and how to keep them forever, marrying them off so that the property of the husband becomes that of the slave owner and whatnot. He's advocating that none of that's going away. And then he also teaches that if you steal, you should cut off your hand. There's a lot that he teaches that people don't know about that isn't good stuff. Castrate,
yeah. Kingdom of Heaven, yeah.
Actually, there is one thing I do got to make this, because when I was going to church, I did ask this question because they were reading from the Bible, and they did talk about the part where they only got to the part where Jesus said, "I did not come to bring peace, but I came to bring a sword," and he pretty much ended it right there after reading a good 20 lines before that. And I asked the pastor after, I was like, "What do you mean he brought a sword?" And he spun it off by saying he came to bring a sword as in he was going to vanquish evil and drive back the demons of the world and completely destroy sin. And then I was like, "Oh, okay." And then I picked up my Bible and read it and said, "It says father against son and daughter and mother against daughter. That's not demons that's telling everybody to kill one another in your family. I'm like, that is completely not what he was saying.
I think the two things I would respond to somebody who says, "What does it matter if Jesus was real?" I'd say that the things that they mentioned, all the good about Jesus, those were all older ideas. There's nothing unique and brand new in Christianity. He doesn't bring anything onto the table that wasn't already there.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say is, once you give up what is real, what else are you going to believe in? Are you going to believe in the tooth fairy? Are you going to believe in whatever? You have to stick with what you can prove, what you can say
Cthulhu
exists.
Yeah.
Cthulhu, exactly.
Yeah. So, I wanted to address one other main topic before we kind of do some more free, like we go a little more free with this. So that was I had been asked, as I mentioned earlier, by Travis, friend of the show, who was on last week's episode, if we could talk a little bit about Josephus and his role in all of this. So, what I went ahead and did was, before the show started, I had Brandon send me a couple of links, and we did a little bit of researching on what Josephus was and what he talked about and whatnot. And we found some arguments that suggest why it might be truthful and why it might be superstitious. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go back to this page that we've been on, because it talks a little bit about Josephus, and it gives a little bit of a makeshift introduction on him so that people can understand who he was and what he did and why this is important. The Jewish historian Josephus...
Can I say one thing before we get started?
Go, absolutely, Dave.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but
no, go ahead.
The biggest problem I have with people who bring up Josephus is they think that it's a contemporary of Jesus' time. Mm-hmm. He was born after Jesus was supposed to be dead.
Yep.
Right.
Well said, Dave. And I'm just going to keep my mouth shut when we talk about Josephus and then jump in later, or else we're never going to get a word in about Josephus.
I think that's why we're doing the arguments against it first.
Yeah. If you want to jump in at any time, though, in all seriousness, you go right ahead, because we still got about a half hour to cover in the show, and if you've got something worth material value to throw in, I want it in there.
That said, let me just piggyback on what Dave just said, and it's not just that Flavius Josephus is the first Jewish historian, to mention Jesus supposedly, but as Dave said, he was born after Jesus was supposed to have died, and he wrote his book towards the end of the 1st century. And what's more about that, the important thing, even the reason we even care about Josephus at all is because of the whole 1st century, he's the only one that supposedly, allegedly, corroborates what we hear in the Gospels. He's the only one in the entire first 100 years or so of Christianity. And that's a big deal because, as I argue nailed, he doesn't mention Jesus. And we can make a point that is a forgery. And in fact, that's not even controversial to say that his mention of Jesus is a forgery. The only argument comes now is how much of it is a forgery.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, considering many...
Except for when you talk to laymen. When you talk to ordinary laymen who are believers, they still think that Josephus is real. If you talk to anybody who's a scholar, they know that it's interpolation.
Yeah, there's many preachers and evangelicals who will tell you that Josephus isn't real. Then there are just probably an equal amount, if not greater, that'll tell you that it was real and all this other stuff.
Obviously, I can't say every one of them.
I said some, and then half and half, but not really half and half. Just to give you an idea that it's divided somewhere where there are some who say it's false, there are some who say it's real.
Right. And I make the argument in the book that it's obvious that the thing is 100% pure bullshit. It was never originally part. Not even, they try to bring in, there's this Syrian, there's the Arabic testimonium versions. Those all date back to Eusebius or paraphrases of Eusebius. What we're talking about is there's two passages. The one that people talk about the most is called the Testimonium because it's and that's clearly a 100% forgery. Most of all, we know that because for 300 years of Christianity, people love talking about Josephus, mining his works for proof of Christianity. They never mention this at all, and they complain about Josephus never mentioning Jesus. They complain about not having things outside the gospel to corroborate the gospels. And yet, suddenly, in the 4th century, boom, with Eusebius, all of a sudden this appears out of nowhere, and starts
Exactly.
It's like everybody who has read Harry Potter for the years it's been around, well, much longer now, saying that it's too bad that Harry Potter books doesn't say anything about a certain character, and then years later somebody
300 years later.
300 years later somebody finds a quote from one of the books saying, "Oh look, it does say it."
Yeah,
It's unbelievable.
It's magically there. It was there the whole time.
Yeah, that's the big one. The back end of that is a kind of offhanded comment called the James reference, where it's talking about James, the brother of Jesus, and we make the argument, I and Richard Carrier made the argument the first time that this is clearly an interpolation because it's not talking about Jesus, James the brother of Jesus. It's talking about James the brother of somebody else. Of Jesus the brother, son of Damnius, not the guy who's actually mentioned in the passage, not Jesus at all. And there's all kinds of arguments to back that up. I mean, there's just about James, the brother of Jesus.
It's basically like confusing you and me because we have share the same name. There's another Jesus.
Well, and I don't think it's a confusion. I think monks saw that and said, "Oh, wait, no, they must mean." I mean, they deliberately altered it to say who was called Christ. That little snippet was stuck in there. You take that out, and it's clearly about the guy who they're talking about in there, Jesus, the son of Damnius. You know.
Right. Well, what we're going to do here, Brandon and I, is we're going to take a little bit more look into the testimonium to show why it's more or less likely flawed, forgery, whatever words you'd like. But before we get into it, I want to give a little bit of a background here. We talked a little bit about it already, but just for some closure reference, if you will. The Jewish historian Josephus was the earliest non-Christian to mention Jesus. Josephus's birth in 37 CE, well after the alleged crucifixion of Jesus, means he could not have been an eyewitness. Moreover, he wrote Antiquities in 93 CE, even later than the first Gospels. Despite Josephus having long been a favorite of apologists, many scholars think that Josephus's short accounts of Jesus in Antiquities came from interpolations perpetuated by a later church father, most likely Eusebius of Caesarea. Caesarea, thank you. Antiquities of the Jews begin, in the beginning God created the heaven and earth, and erroneously parallels the Old Testament up to the time when Josephus is able to add equally tedious historical recountings of Jewish life during the early Roman period. In Book 18, Chapter 3, this paragraph is encountered, and I'm just going to read it and we'll stop after this. Now there was about this time a Jesus, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man, for he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as receive the truth with pleasure. He drew over him both many of the Jews and many of the Gentiles, and was the Christ. And when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal man amongst us, had condemned him to the cross, those that loved him at the first did not forsake him, for he appeared to them alive again on the third day, as the divine prophets had foretold these and 10,000 other wonderful things concerning him, and the tribe of Christians so named from him are not extinct to this day.
Yeah, and a Jewish Pharisee is supposed to have written that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Again, there's no debate that it's a forgery. The only debate has come down to, can they save part of it?
Yeah.
Right.
And who did it?
Who did it? Yeah.
Yeah. So
and
now we're going to do. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, we have the answers. We know it was Eusebius, or possibly the guy he got his book from, but clearly, you know.
Mm-hmm. So now what Ben and I are actually going to do here is we've pulled up, like I mentioned, some arguments that show reasons for and against it. Brandon will be representing the for side, I'll be representing the against side to do some more devil's advocate, ironically. Let me just tab over to that for a second.
Should I keep my mouth shut?
Brandon's going to go first. If you want to, you can interject or not. It's totally up to you. We've got a lot of time left, so Brandon is going to do the for side. He'll go first because typically that's how these things work. The for goes and then the against goes. Otherwise, we have a really interesting burden of proof here. So we'll have Brandon go first, and he's on the positive side. So Brandon, go ahead. And you've got, what did you say? It was 12 arguments or 10 arguments? I
believe mine had less than yours.
Okay.
I believe I have the 10 and you have the 12.
Okay.
I have the 10, which,
so you read all 10
as you can see, compared to his, are quite long.
Mm-hmm.
just so everybody knows, as a disclaimer, I am not for this in actuality. All right. Gotta put that out there so no one gets confused. All right, so I'll start with one. Here are the arguments that are of various quality that aim to show that the testimonium, help me out here, Flavianum or something like that.
Testimonium Flavianum.
Oh, okay, thank you. Is partially authentic. Yeah, they saved themselves at that last part. Number one, the argument is made that much of the vocabulary and style matches that of Josephus. Yeah, however you pronounce tomato. His opening phrase, "Now about this time," is used regularly to the point of nausea. The description of Jesus as a wise man is not typically Christian, but it is used by Josephus of, for example, Solomon and Daniel. Similarly, the Christians did not refer to Jesus' miracles as astonishing deeds, but exactly the same expression is used by Josephus of the miracles of Elisha. And Elisha. Oh, it's I. Okay. Yeah. And the description of Christians as a tribe occurs nowhere in early Christian literature, while Josephus uses the word both for the Jewish race and for other national or communal groups. You want me to read all this, Jeremiah?
Yeah, I mean,
I got a long way to go.
Yeah, I was going to say that's going to be really boring if we keep going there, but I can jump in and say a few things against that.
Sure.
Jump because you know what, that's just a lot just for point one to go.
And I'll make sure that everybody gets these on my page.
In a nutshell, they're saying that most of the they're saying that much of the style and vocabulary matches Josephus, but it's only in a very superficial way. Like, for instance, his opening phrase, "Now about this time," that's very Josephian. But other things that he uses in the meat of the content are not typical Josephian vocabulary. It's not his style either.
Totally agree.
And Josephian scholars have mentioned that. The guy who wrote this is aping Josephus, but he's not quoting. He's not doing it in an authentic style.
Agreed. And I find it interesting that usually when you're making an argument, you make your best argument first. If he's starting out with, started with the first line, he copies a line that has been used a dozen times before in that book.
Yeah.
It's to go into
a little bit more detail about it, here's what a guy named Meyer writes. The comparison of vocabulary between Josephus and the New Testament does not provide a neat solution to the problem of authenticity, but it does force us to ask which of two possible scenarios is more probable. Did a Christian of some unknown century so immerse himself in the vocabulary style of Josephus that, without the aid of any modern dictionaries or concordances, he was able to, 1, strip himself of the New Testament vocabulary with which he would naturally speak of Jesus, and 2, reproduce perfectly the Greek of Josephus for most of the testimonium?
Let me stop you right there.
All right, go ahead.
He doesn't perfectly reproduce it. That's the thing. He managed to get some of his stock phrases in there, but he's not reproduced, and that's a part of the problem. And again, this whole line of argument, what Dave said, if this is their strongest, we've got a problem, because the bigger argument is that this doesn't even show up for 300 years when early Christian fathers who loved Josephus were quoting him all the time, just for things like this. They would have given their eye teeth for something like this.
But here's the second one that counteracts this. Or is it more likely that the core statement, which we first isolated simply by extracting what would strike anyone at first glance as Christian affirmations, and which we would then found to be written in typically Josephine vocabulary that diverged from the usage of the New Testament, was in fact written by Josephus himself? And the guy says, of the two scenarios, I find the second much more probable.
Well, here's the thing, though. He acts like you'd have to have this dictionary and be a black belt in Josephus to do this. No, you wouldn't. You just need to read some of his books, as we know that they did, and you'd be able to do it too.
Joseph Smith wrote in 16th century English pretty well.
Bingo, there you go. Reformed Egyptian. Yeah.
I believe it is my competitor's turn.
Oh yes, let me jump over to my side of the things now.
All right, so these don't finish that one up. Perfect.
Yeah, these don't necessarily line up with one another. They're just sort of like arguments for and against. So my number one, which is much smaller, fortunately, It is sometimes argued that the phrase "to this day" at the end of the passage indicates the perspective of a writer who was writing long after the events in question, and that Josephus was too close in time to make it believable that he would have used the expression. On the contrary, a span of 60 years' time after the death of Jesus is sufficient to cause some surprise at the survival of the cult. According to the speech of Gamaliel in Acts... Gamaliel, thank you. Acts 5:35 to 39, most movements disbanded shortly after the death of the leader.
You know what? Actually, that's kind of neither here nor there, but it does raise one point that other guys have risen, that he's writing so late that even if this is authentic, it doesn't tell us anything that he wouldn't have just heard from Christians, on the street saying this, which is something that never even occurred to me until this year. That you're right. He's writing in the year 93 or 94,
and Christians certainly existed at that time.
Exactly. Yeah. Nobody doubts there were Christians in the 1st and 2nd century. Yeah. But this, yeah. And again, I've got other arguments about this. I got a whole book full of arguments like this.
Right on. All right, so I think it's Brandon up now for number 2.
All right, I'm going to skip the first paragraph. Actually, Jeremiah, do me a favor. Go down to my number 2 because that's actually an argument against it, and then they have the argument for response in the second paragraph. So I'll let you read that one, and then I'll read the counter.
Let me find your link here. Which one is yours?
It should be on the same page as you're on.
Okay, sorry. Oh yeah, that's right. It's tabbed.
One big page.
Yeah. I forgot about how we did this. All right, so I'm reading your number 2, first paragraph. All right. James A. Charlesworth argues, we can be confident that there was a minimal reference to Jesus because once the clearly Christian sections are removed, the rest makes good grammatical and historical sense. Christian words are parenthetically connected to the narrative, hence they are grammatically free and could easily have been inserted by a Christian. These sections are also disruptive, and when they are removed, the flow of thought is improved and smoother. For example, once the reference to the resurrection is deleted, the thought moves from Christian continuance active after the crucifixion to a non-existent nature of the tribe.
You know what? I got to stop you there. I'm sorry.
Go for it.
If you're going to use that argument, then the whole testimonium falls out, because if you look at the testimonium in that chapter as a whole, that chapter is this gloom and doom chapter of all these horrible things happening to the Jews in Jerusalem at the time. There's this horrible, massacre, another sad calamity. That all the Jews are kicked out of Rome. It's just gloom, 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 until we get to this little commercial for Jesus right in the middle of all that. And the thing is, when you read the next paragraph after this beautiful little, Jesus is great, isn't he great? It says, at this time there was another sad calamity. It's like, what? Sad calamity? What sad calamity? Oh, you mean a paragraph before when Pilate killed all those people in Jerusalem? Yeah, that qualifies. This thing, no matter how you slice it, this thing just sticks out as a sore thumb. I'd say in the book, or at least in one of my talks, it sticks out like a Britney Spears video in the middle of a funeral.
Love it.
That line, if you take out the part that everybody pretty much agrees was interpolated or inserted, that line, which now with the other parts in there looks like a non sequitur, completely follows.
Right. Even though they can't agree on what is there's so many hypothetical reconstructions of this. And again, it's like there's so many arguments we talked about before we even take it seriously at face value. Like the fact that where was it for 300 years? Why did all the early church fathers complain that Josephus never talked about? Origen, church father, specifically mentions that he bags on Josephus for not mentioning Jesus, and yet Origen is the guy who gave Eusebius his copy of the book that supposedly had this passage in it. It's like, it's such bullshit. Such bullshit. And it makes me crazy because the reason that Christians fight tooth and nail for these two suspicious little things is because
that's all they have.
If that's all they got. That's all they got for the whole first century to corroborate the Gospels.
Yep.
That's it.
Yep.
Indeed.
So you can imagine the worldview falling apart here. When you take, if you're building that high of a platform off of that small amount of information, you might want to reconsider your building your strategy. Just saying.
Or at least stop telling us that it's the most well documented case for him.
Blah,
No,
blah, blah.
it isn't.
It is not. Absolutely.
Yep.
Yep. Yeah.
So the against that is maintained that this here we go. It is maintained that the so-called Christian sections are integral parts of the text. The phrase "for he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as received the truth with pleasure," refers to the phrase "if it be lawful to call him a man," and in the present text explains why Jesus is considered to be more than a man. The phrase,
it's like these are their best arguments, and they're just so random and subjective. You know, it's like, well, clearly, blah 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 blah, and they ignore the fact that this wasn't around for 300 years. They ignore the fact that it doesn't fit in with the passage. They ignore, they just ignore all these major things, and then they just sort of tease and tinker about, oh, well, linguistically, blah 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 blah, and it's like they're talking out of their ass. It's like, why give this thing so much? And I know the answer. The answer is because this is all they've got. This is all they've got. I'm just saying.
You can't prove any of what you just said. I'm going to finish what I'm saying and disprove you wrong because I am for this right now.
Oh.
Yeah.
If it sounds like I've been beating my head against a wall over this for over 10 years, that's because that's exactly what it is.
Plus,
If you need to head desk, David, I understand.
Plus, do we really need to even bring up the superiority complex of asserting that your specific part of a text is the most important part and it's the most integral part of the whole thing? When we get to a point where you're saying, look, we know that we have this piece here and there's this tiny little section about our Savior and our particular life view, but it's the most important part. Like if you skip this, why even read the rest of it? When, as we mentioned earlier, the opposite is true. It is detrimental that we take that out. It is, if you take that out, all of a sudden everything makes more sense, what he's talking about. If you remove the resurrection and whatnot, then it's all of a sudden it makes more sense. So if you're going to use this as an argument for your Savior, you should probably make sure that it makes sense that it's about your Savior first.
There you go.
Remember, Jeremiah, the majority of Christians out there don't read their Bible in full. So why would they read that book in full when they could just take the part that they like?
If someone
they'll read something Lee Strobel wrote and say, "Oh, okay."
If someone on a platform like Ray Comfort comes out and says, "You should do this because I say so," he has his followers that will do it. And Ken Ham, same thing. Kurt Cameron, same thing. When you have guys that have a platform that can come out and say, "Hey guys, ever hear of Josephus? Josephus proves Jesus." End of story. The followers go, "Well, no point to do any research. Ray Comfort said it."
Bingo.
If Ray Comfort said it, how could it be wrong? So,
and that's exactly what it set out to do, and that's exactly what it does. So, good job, Lee Strobel. Good job, Ray Comfort. You did exactly what your sheep wanted your sheep to do.
And for the record, as we stated at the beginning of the show, I'll restate again for clarification purposes, that is the opposite of what we're here to do. We're not telling you Josephus is wrong and expecting you to go, well, the guys on the show said it, so that's the end of story. What we want you, that's why we're giving you the arguments, why we're giving you the reasons, because we want you to hear them and come to the conclusions yourself. If you read the entire script of Josephus and think, you know what, maybe that Christianity part of it really is important, maybe this does show Jesus, you have every right to come to that conclusion, and we'll avidly disagree with you, but you have every right to come to the conclusion as long as you did it on your own. That's all that we care about. So
yeah, absolutely. There's benefit in just talking about this stuff and getting it out there, because one of the arguments that they'll make is that, well, everybody agrees that he exists. Well, no, everybody doesn't agree that he exists. We have very good historians who don't agree that he exists.
Right. Mm-hmm. And the ones who agree that he did exist, the secular ones, their Jesuses that they postulate are just as hypothetical as the one that the Christians have.
Yep.
But here's the thing: if any of them are right, Christians' Jesus is debunked. So it's like when I hear Christians say things like, "Well, no historian doubts that Jesus existed," it's like, yeah, they doubt your Jesus existed. Yeah, big time.
Yep.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And you can never start with a position of always, because you will get to never very quickly. If you start with a position
that
of
is
all,
true in every single case. Yes.
Yeah. if you start at a position of always, you'll be the reaching never will be harder than it would have been.
Yeah.
So, so I think it's my turn now, and I would do want to stress we only have about 10 minutes left, so we'll kind of flash through some of this Josephus stuff really quickly, and then we'll get to. I want to get to about final thoughts. I want to get to about. I do have that ability. I want to get to final thoughts at about 9:55 here. So, let's see. Number 2 for me is kind of long. Oh, okay. This is talk. Oh, you know what? I'm in your section. That's why it's long. Because I never left your section to go back to mine. It is often argued that the description of Jesus is unusually short for Josephus. For example, Josephus devotes over twice as much space to the description of John the Baptist. Although suggestive, this argument is not conclusive. Professor Sanders considers this passage to be the best objective evidence for the importance of Jesus during his own lifetime. The Gospels create an impression that the entire populace was vitally interested in Jesus and what happened to him. Certainly, he did attract attention. But if we measure the general impact of prophetic figures by the degree of disturbance they caused, we shall conclude that Jesus was less important in the eyes of most of his contemporaries than were John the Baptist and the Egyptian.
There you go. There you go. And again, it's like all these other would-be messiahs and wannabe messiahs, they made history.
Yeah, they're in the books.
That's why I don't think Jesus could have been a stealth messiah, that some secular historians say. I don't see how you can have it both ways. It's like, okay, either he did all these amazing, incredible things and no one noticed for over a century, or he didn't, and yet as soon as he's dead, you've got all these feuding little cultlets that are preaching their own Jesus that can't agree with each other on the basic facts of his life.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's really much more to be said on that in the regards of, if you're dealing with someone who's supposed to be this important and you can't get the facts straight, he either wasn't as important as you think he was, or you weren't even remotely at the level of intelligence you needed to be to comprehend what was going on around you, and you really don't need to be talking about it anyway, because if you can't understand it, all you're going to do is perpetuate a lie and misinformation, which is more detrimental than saying nothing.
Or as I would also agree with, I think, David, he didn't exist.
Yeah. There is always that third option, but trying to be nice to people.
Well, yeah, I'm just saying. And I could be wrong, but you know what? And if I am wrong, I want to know, but I don't think I am wrong.
As of right now,
I'm sorry, but I have to react to that. What we're saying is the truth.
I know. I know.
Well, it's not being rude to speak the truth.
There you go.
And you know what? That's what I say on. I've posted that on No God a lot, actually. A lot of people get really upset with some of the stuff I put up there. For example, we had a post that said biblical deathmatch, and it was God versus Satan, who killed more people. And the answer is quite obvious if you know even a little bit about the Bible and what goes on. People got really pissed because they were like, well, God doesn't kill people, people kill people in the name of God. And I'm like, he either allowed it to happen and it's his fault, or he made it happen and it's his fault. You don't get to pass off the blame. Yeah, he's either omnipotent and he knew it was going to happen and it's his fault, or he's not omnipotent and he's also not all-powerful because he didn't do anything to stop it and it's his fault.
Yeah,
that's what
he's always acting like a pissy little bitch all the time anyway. It's like,
why won't no one worship me?
But that's why I always post that on No God, that I'm not afraid to step on people's toes, because sometimes you need to feel a little pain to make a little progress, is what I always say. And I'm willing to do that if it helps you.
And even more so, if we're wrong, we want to know, so tell us, but give us good arguments for what you believe, because we have reasons for what we believe.
Yeah.
In fact, I wouldn't even call it belief. It's like we have evidence that we find compelling.
Yeah, if you believe that Jesus roamed the earth, that Jesus was who it says he was, that he did all the things that it says he did, that he's an original character, and you can go, look, here's a laid out, well thought out, well written, well-detailed, well-supported claim as to why, and it backs up, it holds its own, we're not going to go, oh, well, too bad, we still don't believe it. We're going to go, well, you got me, that's true, I was wrong, here is your handshake, thank you for the new information, I always like learning. That's how it goes. If we're not sitting here doing an episode about whether or not Jesus existed or not because it's more convenient to the atheist position that Christianity is wrong. We're doing
Absolutely.
We're doing an episode about.
I gotta stop you here, Jeremy, because that's a great point. We don't need Jesus to be a myth. There's lots of atheists out there who don't think Jesus was a myth, who think he was just a guy.
Yeah.
You can't say that about Christians. You know,
I
even
myself
worse
was
for
an atheist.
Christianity than evolution, because you can twist your Christianity to fit evolution. You can't twist it to make Jesus myth theory.
Yeah.
Yep. I was
It's
an atheist
kryptonite.
long before I thought Jesus was a myth.
Yeah.
They're not linked at all.
Yeah.
Right. Well, we didn't get a whole lot of time to do the rest of the Josephus thing, which isn't a big deal. I'm going to throw up all the links on the Mind. I'm basically going to create a big image that says "This Week on Mind of an Atheist" and just have all the links in the description for anyone who, and I'll label the date. So anybody who wants to get all the information that we have, I'll provide everything with like separate labels. So you'll be able to get David's book, and you'll be able to get I can find, but
Books.
what? Yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot. My bad. Books, and I'll also post up links to the movie convention and everything else that David does, and of course our pages as well and everything else. But we've reached the 5-minute mark. We've got 5 minutes left, and what I always like to do at the end of the show is give everyone an opportunity to talk about their final thoughts. You know, we've talked about a whole lot of material here on today's show. We went back through and compared Jesus to other myths throughout history, comparing dates and stories. We talked a lot about the biblical fallacies and problems with accepting Jesus. We talked about Josephus' claims with accepting Jesus and a whole lot more along the way. And I know there's a lot of information that we threw out there, so if anybody has any final thought on anything we talked about, if they want to backtrack, go to a comment that they liked, or whatever the case, I'm going to turn it over, and we'll go with whoever wants to go first. I normally go left to right, but I know that kind of puts people on the spot, so whoever...
Let's do.
Okay. So whoever wants to go first, jump in and give us your final thought for the episode.
Well, first I'd like to say thank you, David. You gave me a hell of a lot of information I didn't know about, especially in regards to, forgive me if I get this wrong, what was it, one of the Gnostic books you were talking about?
Yeah.
How they, if I remember correctly, it was how they discovered that part of it was being translated into a Christian version of a pagan book. That I didn't even know that was a real thing. I kind of want to go do more research on that. Nagamadi text? Okay.
Yeah.
I might have to spell that out for me at a later time.
Used to know
Okay, yeah.
the pagan text.
Okay. But yeah, there's plenty of stuff that I did know, though, that I've done my research on, and why I believe that the Jesus that's portrayed in the Bible isn't real. All in all, again, thank you again, David, for coming, and Jeremiah for having him, because that was really a lot of information that I needed. And who knows how many more.
If we're going to thank anybody, Ryan, Dave, and Jesse for being the voice for me, getting David in here, so give all three of them a big shout.
Yeah, Ryan actually emailed him. I asked David, but that's okay.
Well, then Ryan's
hey,
not here. Thank you,
however
for
went down.
doing that.
Yeah.
Whoever
went down, I'm just glad it went down. So,
I'm ready for my
ahead,
final
Dave.
thoughts if you were done, Brandon.
Yes.
I am finished. Go ahead.
Okay.
I
think the important reason to argue that Jesus may not have existed is because if they're going to use this bad of an argument for the existence of Jesus, it proves that they're willing to use bad arguments for other things. So that's the thing. This is one where we can really hold them to account, because we can point to things. There's a lot of things where they're arguing lies that we think are lies, but we don't have the evidence to say those are lies. This is one where we can say, no, that's a lie.
Yeah.
No, it's not. No, it's not a really well evidenced case. We can really hold them to account on this one. So whether or not Jesus existed, pointing out how badly they're arguing is its own reward.
Absolutely.
I think my favorite moment for tonight was when you were saying that they were talking out of their ass, and that was just beautiful.
Yes. We got an Ace Ventura reference in the show. Perfect.
Never thought that would happen, but I'm glad it did. As the host, I'm very glad it did.
And thank you very much for coming on, David. This was everything I thought it would be when I asked you to come on.
Thanks again for having me.
No problem. And do you have a final thought for us as well, bud?
just that if anybody's got more questions or wants to talk about this more, I do want to steer you to my book because, you know, I spent a long ass time writing it, and it says a lot of what I want to say about this, and I've got more books coming. But if you think I'm wrong, or if you want to just talk about it, hunt me down on Facebook, shoot me an email at everybodylovesdave@gmail.com, and I'd be happy to talk about it more. And thanks again for having me, you guys. It's been awesome.
Hey, please, it was my pleasure to have you on. You were probably one of the best guests we've ever had. So
I talked the most, for damn sure. Yeah.
You would give Eliza a run for her money whenever you get to meet Eliza. And if Eliza, if you're watching, that was not an invitation. No, I'm kidding, of course. Anyway, with that being said, folks, we have come to the end of the show. We want to thank everyone who watched. For sticking around for what I know was a content-heavy episode. I know typically our episodes are a little more free and they're a little more, open and discussion. Like, I know this was really content-heavy, so we want to thank you. We actually capped off at one point at 38 viewers, so that is the highest we've ever had on one live episode at a time. So I'm very happy to have had 38 viewers at one point. And I want to thank everybody who was participating in the comments. We actually had a lot of commenters today, which was awesome. We had Belzer, who I'm still going to look for whatever it was that you were trying to send us. Stealth 6, which is Mike, friend of the show. Reese's Pieces, which is Chairman Reese. Mike Sherlock, which is a good friend of the show. Oregon Atheist, shout out to you. Viper 4382, friend of the show. There's more here. I know there's more here. Brandon was commenting, I can see. Cryan Candoza 2, probably pronounced that wrong, but that's okay because he knows it's him or her. Pamela Tyndall, thanks Pamela. And I want to also, of course, thank our wonderful panel for being part of the show today. Brandon from Life of an Atheist, Dave Hall from Hammer the Gods, and of course David, author of multiple books and founder of lots of awesome causes. I want to encourage everyone to go to these Facebook pages and like them, as well as going to the Mind of an Atheist Facebook page itself and giving it a like for all the information that you can get more of from this episode. I don't know when that post will be up, probably tomorrow at some point because I got a lot to do tonight, so we'll see about that. We've been doing the Mind of an Atheist Song of the Week thing, and this week, just because of the topic, the Mind of an Atheist Song of the Week is Personal Jesus by Depeche Mode. So,
One second, Jeremiah.
Yes.
How long until we get mything around?
Till we get what?
David's book.
Mything in Action.
Mything in Action, that's it.
The Mormon book took a long time to come out, about 6 months more than I thought it would, so that's going to have to be delayed till sometime next year, I think. But as soon as I possibly can, for sure. For sure.
All right. So as I was saying, the song of the week this week is Personal Jesus by Depeche Mode, and don't worry, it's not a religious song at all. It's quite the opposite, actually, believe it or not. So if you've never heard of Depeche Mode, I don't know where the hell you've been, but that's the song of the week. Check it out. It's a great song. You can check out the Marilyn Manson or Johnny Cash covers if that's more up your alley. Marilyn Manson probably would be, considering of who we all are. So I just want to remind everybody once again that there will be a post-show hangout. You can join the post-show hangout. Up to 10 people are able to get in. It is first come, first serve. Remember, you're going to be able to find links to that at both the image that promoted this episode on the Mind of an Atheist Facebook, and you're going to be able to find it on the YouTube channel. Please give us about 5 minutes in each place to get that link up so that you can actually join it. And remember to look for the most recent link because there are some dead ones out there from previous episodes. So now that everything's out of the way, if there's nothing else left to say, I just want to thank everyone once again for having a great episode. We look forward to seeing all of you lovelies in the post-show hangout, and we will see you next week on the Mind of an Atheist. Have a good night, folks.